A running gag on the Newscast podcast this week has been Chris Mason's propensity to spill food on himself.
Yes. So far, so good.
Actually, you're doing pretty well today.
Not too bad.
I mean, it's early days, though.
It is.
I did see you eating a salad very gingerly earlier on. You're obviously feeling a bit self-conscious about it.
Yes.
Well, Newscast listeners are a very resourceful bunch, as demonstrated by Peter, who sent us this picture. Now, that may look like a chap at a restaurant with a napkin around him.
Or a tablecloth.
Or a tablecloth, quite a big napkin. But if you zoom in, he's got a little sort of contraption that attaches it to his top button, which means it stays in place.
Peter, not only do I think that this is a new fashion staple, and obviously everyone seeks fashion endorsements for me, but is screaming in practicality as well. I need to get one of these.
Wow. A story that's going to develop over time. Right. We're going to get serious now because we're going to have one guest on tonight's episode of Newscast. It's a person who's been in the news in a massive way this week because of what someone said about him. It is the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan.
Newscast. Newscast from the BBC.
Hello, it's Adam in the studio.
And Chris in the studio.
And we're joined by the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan. Hello.
Good to see you both. Good to be here.
I'm just thinking there's so many things we could ask you. We could have like a 3-hour long kind of Joe Rogan style podcast.
Let's do it.
The only
Who's
time
going to speak to the bosses?
Yeah, exactly. BBC One taking over for 3 hours. The only thing we would ever have in common with Joe Rogan. Right. Serious subject first. We got an inquiry out today, or the first part of an inquiry, that was looking at how Wayne Couzens, a serving Metropolitan Police officer who murdered Sarah Everard in 2021 in London, could ever have been a Metropolitan Police officer. What was it like for you as somebody who's got political oversight of that force, reading that report? Because on every single page, there was something really bad that had gone wrong over decades.
Can I begin the conversation by speaking about Sarah Everard and her family, her parents and her siblings, because it's important we remember her in the context of this conversation. I remember vividly the days after Sarah disappeared, because I live not far from where Sarah disappeared from, and it was during the pandemic, and my wife and daughters would go regularly for walks in and around that area. So it brings it all back, not just to Sarah and her family, but to those of us who live in and around the area. But actually all women and girls, and those of us who've got family who are women and girls, will be impacted by today's report. The reason why the report is so important is it's quite clear this sexual predator and this sex offender was known prior to joining one of the 3 police forces he joined. So he should never have joined the police service in the first place. Kent Constabulary, the Civil Nuclear Authority, Met Police Service. During his service in all 3 police forces, it was clear there were warnings, there were signals, there were red flags, not taken seriously. In the days preceding the abduction, rape and murder of Sarah, again, his inappropriate behaviour was demonstrated by the indecent exposure. Again, no
Which
action.
he's done quite a few times.
That is one of many things he's done. One of the reasons why I in the end lost confidence with the former commissioner was a failure to understand the systemic and cultural failings, but also have a plan to take action. And an example of that is just the fact that this guy was sharing horrible photographs with fellow officers. Nobody called him out. Nobody reported him up. No action was taken. So this is an issue that I think all 43 police forces must look into. We've got to make sure we change the culture and systems within the police service. It's far, far too easy to become a police officer. It's far too difficult to get rid of dodgy officers. But also, we've got to be an organisation, the Met Police Service and all the others, that is anti-misogynistic, anti-racist, anti-homophobic. So there isn't a culture where this sort of behaviour is acceptable.
And that's the striking thing, isn't it? That this wasn't just a single police force. This wasn't just a force where you could say, is there a particular culture in Force A that is an exception here? There was 3.
Well, I was reflecting, a couple of years ago when this all really got to the fore. Whether you work for the BBC, City Hall, Sainsbury's, or the police service, some sort of behaviour from your colleagues is out of order and you report it, right? But with police officers, because they've got this huge amount of power, huge amount of discretion, it's even more incumbent for there to be checks and balances. And let us be quite clear, the only reason Sarah got into that car was because this guy showed his warrant card. Sarah's parents have said, and her siblings, she would not have got into a car with a stranger. So we know Sarah was abducted, raped and murdered because this man was a police officer. And, Chris is right. This isn't just a police service issue. And we've been trying in the last few years to change the culture within the police service of London. It's an issue for all of policing. That's why I'm really pleased the National Police Chief Council are responding today as one, as all 43 police forces.
Lady Angelini, the Scottish lawyer who did this inquiry, and there's still 2 more parts of this inquiry to go, so we could learn even more awful details about how bad the police are with some things. She says kind of just doing the existing policies to stamp out misogyny kind of better isn't enough. But to me, that sounds like she's being critical of existing police chiefs who kind of are just, they say, we don't need to come up with anything new to solve the culture problems in the police. We just need to do existing things a bit better.
Look, I know somebody, because of my life experiences, what it's like to be different and how you're treated by the police. When I first became the Mayor of London and was told by senior police officers, including the former Commissioner, these are some rotten apples, or the phrase used was wrong uns. It's not just some wrong uns or some bad apples. There are systems and cultures in place that encourage people like this to join, but also they stay within this organisation without action being taken. There are other brave officers who do report it. It takes 2 years for that complaint to be investigated. No action is taken. The leaders haven't got the proper training. There isn't the proper supervision. The right processes aren't in place. And so if you're a woman police officer, you think, what's the point of making a complaint? If you're a black police officer, what's the point of making a complaint? And that's within the police service. Imagine members of the public.
Yeah, but the point of my question was the proposals that Sir Mark Rowley, the boss of the Met, has put to you and others about how he's going to reform the Met in terms of all of this stuff. Are they sufficient? Do they meet the size of the challenge? Or actually, do we need a sort of step change, something different?
Well, what we have in today's report is 16 further recommendations. So what Sir Mark did when he became the Commissioner of the Police Service with his number 2, Dame Lynn Owens, is go and speak to Londoners. And he deserves huge credit. He went to every single borough with his top team and engaged with Londoners. He listened and he responded with what he calls, and I support, the new Met for London plan. No other police force has that, by the way. The only police service in the country to have that. The recommendations today want us to go even further. We will go even further.
If these cultural issues are as deeply embedded in the mindset of policing institutions, for all of the attempts to change that, is it not just going to take a generation for a whole generation of officers and support staff to leave and the next generation to come on? Because you're trying to change the culture and habits of thousands of people and perhaps an institutional mentality, and that might be admirable, but it's likely to be blooming difficult.
Well, the really good news is, and it's important I say this, there are tens of thousands of brilliant officers, thoroughly decent, thoroughly brave, with the right values. They need our support by changing the systems. I'll give you an example.
To create an environment where they can speak up and call out.
Spot on.
Right.
And so you would say, if you're a supervisor in any police service, look, when somebody makes a complaint about racism or sexism, we take it seriously. The point is creating an environment where people know that sort of behaviour is unacceptable, so they don't use that sort of language. But also simple things we can do, right? Speed up the process when a complaint's made. Make sure the hearings are heard much, much quicker. Make sure there's automatic suspension when a serious allegation is made, but also dismissal with some offences being found guilty of. It's just, as I said, far too easy to become a police officer with the huge powers they have. Far too difficult to get rid of bad officers, but also the culture needs to change. And by the way, it isn't just a police issue. A lot of the institutions within our country have systemic and cultural issues that demand addressing.
One of the other things that the report finds, and I thought this was quite interesting because it was just looking at how crime is dealt more generally, and it was about the fact that Wayne Couzens had been guilty of indecent exposure, which in the old days people might have called flashing. And actually we need a cultural change about how we deal with that crime.
It's worse than that. He was never found guilty of indecent exposure because nobody took it seriously. And here's the point she's making, which is a really important point. If there's a spectrum of offences, a red flag is somebody who indecently exposes. Because the police nationally, it's a trivial offence, it's not really serious, it's somebody having fun. Don't take that seriously. Those red flags, those early warnings weren't taken seriously, so it wasn't followed up. He wasn't arrested. He wasn't charged. He wasn't found guilty. He wasn't kicked out. And that's the point she's talking about, that police services across the country aren't treating indecent exposure seriously. But this is an early warning / red flag that the police must take seriously.
So what are you going to do as the Mayor of London to make sure that crime is taken more seriously on our public transport network, in our parks, in our streets?
Yeah, many of your listeners who've used public transport will have seen the posters we've got, reported to stop it. Now, all three of us, when we use public transport, haven't got the same shared experience as your women listeners and girls.
No, I'm very conscious this is three blokes having this conversation.
No, because in the rush hour, we've never been touched up. We've never had somebody taking a photograph up our skirts. We've never had somebody acting inappropriately towards us, staring and so forth. And so we've got to educate ourselves as men. And it's got to start early with boys at school in relation to understanding what sort of behaviour is acceptable, what behaviour isn't acceptable. But also we've got to show allyship, man. Because if you're a woman or a girl, often on public transport, or it could be a nightclub, it could be a bar, it could be a place of work. Often you need allyship because you're maybe by yourself. And so we've done a lot of work in City Hall to try and educate the public in a non-patronising way.
Let's talk about the other big news story this week that you found yourself at the centre of, involving Lee Anderson, the former deputy chairman of the Conservatives, now former Conservative MP, because he's lost the whip, to use the parliamentary jargon. There's lots we can ask you about your role scrutinising the Metropolitan Police, but let's talk about the human thing first, and how you felt in your head, in your heart, in your stomach when you first watched that video featuring Lee Anderson.
Well, we're speaking on Thursday, and this happened 6 days ago. And the last 6 days has been an emotional roller coaster. Sadness, anger, frustration, upset, heartbreak. Depending which day of the week you and I would have spoken, I'd have given a different answer. Let me tell you why. There are certain conspiracy theories, certain tropes, certain generalisation, certain lazy untruths that are anti-Semitic. We know what they are, right? I'm not going to repeat them. And you can apply the same towards misogyny and homophobia. We know what they are. I'm not going to repeat them. When you say things like Muslims are taking over London, or the Islamification of our society, Muslim sleeper cells, words like Londonistan, those are all Islamophobic, anti-Muslim, racist phrases, and they should be called out for what they are. You and I can have a discussion, and you can robustly challenge me as a respected journalist and me as the Police and Crown Commissioner about policing in London. We can talk about all sorts of policies. We've just talked about a really serious issue. In my view, my faith is irrelevant. And the fact that you're bringing my faith in means your motives are questionable. Now, let me tell you my heartbreak and my sadness. In real time, I've called out anti-Semitism in my party, including senior members of the Labour Party, in real time. Homophobia, misogyny. We've talked about misogyny in saying I'm in charge of the police service. This is Islamophobic, anti-Muslim and racist. Where's the leader of the Conservative Party? Where's the Deputy Prime Minister? Where's the Cabinet? Where's my mayoral opponent?
Well, they suspended Lee from the party.
Well, let's be quite clear about this. None of those people I've mentioned have used the word Islamophobic or anti-Muslim. And let me ask you this question. When the Prime Minister or Deputy Prime Minister or Cabinet members say it's wrong, it's unacceptable, why? He was suspended for a failure to apologise. For what? And I'll tell you this, there's double standards at play here now, because rightly, we would call out anti-Semitic behaviour. We would call it out, or homophobic or misogyny. Why Sunak, Dowden, the Cabinet, Hall, so scared to say this is Islamophobic, anti-Muslim and racist? And the distraction they have, and it's a distraction, by the way, a sophistry, is, oh, we don't like the definition of Islamophobia, right? This is blasphemy by the back door. That's ridiculous, because the same arguments were used against Corbyn and co when they refused to accept the definition of anti-Semitism. That was the definition that was come up with by the IHRA. I accepted it as the mayor straight away. This definition of Islamophobia has come up by the United Nations, the All-Party Parliamentary Group and others. But even park that. Don't use the word Islamophobic. Call it anti-Muslim hatred. Call it racism. Why are they failing to do so?
Well, there's a few things there. So first of all, the definition, is there no valid criticism of that definition? Is there no valid reason why you as a person or an organisation might not want to sign up to it fully?
So the All-Party Parliamentary Group looked into this. The United Nations looked into this. The short answer is nobody is saying that the religion of Islam deserves protection. This ain't about protecting Islam. It's not blasphemy by the back door. It's about protecting the followers of the religion of Islam. Brackets, Muslims, close brackets. Now, let me be clear. If my name was Cohen, right? My name was Cohen, and this guy said that I was controlled by my mates in the city. What would be the first thing Sunak would have said? What's the first thing he'd have said? It's anti-Semitic, kick him out, right? Well, how is Khan, I'm controlled by whatever he said, how is that different?
Why do you think it's interpreted as different by some?
Well, I think that's for Sunak and Dowden and the others to explain. There's a number of explanations I've been given over the last 6 days by friends of mine who are in the Conservative Party, and it's really important to say this on air. I've been contacted by friends of the Conservative Party who are outraged. It shouldn't be just for the likes of Sajid Javid, Nusrat Ghani and Saeed Varsi to be brave in their party. Just like in my party, it was unacceptable for Louise Ellman, Luciana Berger and Ruth Smith to be talking about this. They need allies like me and others who are allies in real time. So that's the first thing. So I'm really not saying this, that all Conservatives are Islamophobic, all the rest of it. So I'm not saying that. I'm not accusing Sunak of being Islamophobic or anti-Muslim or racist. What I'm saying is what this guy said last Friday was, and it should be called out. Now, the explanations I've been given is because, hold on a sec, if you look back at what he said, it's fascinating. I didn't realise this until somebody pointed it out to me. The reason why I began talking about this was he was saying Suella Braverman, the immediate last Home Secretary, had gone too far in saying the country was run by Islamists. So he's saying, no, I'm paraphrasing, right? No. Braverman's wrong. It's not the country's run by Islamists, but London is. Sadiq Khan under the control of his mates. Well, what's the difference between the country and London? Answer, the mayors of Islamic faith of Pakistani origin.
Is there a distinction? Because you've used the word Islamophobic and you've used the word racist. Is there a distinction between those two things, given that you can be a follower of Islam and not of a different race to lots of other people? It isn't necessarily a racial thing.
Yeah, so I do not want to get into the legal jurisprudence, but in shorthand, there are different definitions of anti-Semitism. There's case law about anti-Semitism. Because of historically the mono-ethnic nature, but it's not anymore. With Islam, you can be a follower of Islam but be of different ethnicities.
Yes.
Question: those Muslims who are practicing who are white, are they ever? We don't know that they're Muslims because they've not got a name called Sadiq Khan. They've not got brown skin. They're not Pakistani origin. There's all sorts of questions you could ask if there was a court case, which there's not going to be.
Someone's missing their legal career.
My point is that's why I'm saying, listen, let's not go down that path of Islamophobia, anti-Muslim hatred, racism. Use any one of those things. Sunak, Dowden, the cabinet.
It's interesting because Tom Tugendhat, the security minister, did use that phrase, didn't he?
Yeah, and Tom deserves credit. This is my point. I will never make sweeping generalisations about Conservatives because of the actions of this man, but the failure to take action should shame Sunak, should shame Dowden. And by the way, I wish Tom was a proper member of the cabinet rather than attending cabinet.
I hear your argument about Islamophobia or anti-Muslim hatred, but just going back to that argument that what Lee Anderson said was racist. Why was it that?
Well, let's go back a stage in relation to...
And he denies that it was,
let's go back a stage in relation to what we're talking about. We're talking about a context where, I'm of Pakistani origin. The previous two mayors weren't. And would he have said those things if either the previous two people were mayor? That's the first point. Second point is we know since October the 7th, emotions are running high in all our communities. And I've tried really hard to bring our communities together over the last 8 years as being the mayor. But there's been a massive increase in anti-Semitism, a massive increase in Islamophobic, anti-Muslim hate crime. So the context of his comments are really important in relation to what he said and when he said them. And so the reason why I deliberately have used the phrase over the last 6 days, Islamophobic, anti-Muslim and racist, is because that's what it is in relation to the tropes, in relation to the generalizations, in relation to the unlazy truths, in relation to what we know are things that have been said about Muslims in the past. And by the way, you can change some of the language and exactly the same things were said about our dear friends who are Jewish. And I've called that out, as have Sunak's, the Dowdens and the cabinets, and I'm unclear whether they're not calling this out.
Let's talk about the broader issue away from his words specifically around you and the broader questions around policing and protests in London with your role overseeing the Metropolitan Police. One of the things he talked about was the projection of that phrase from the river to the sea, which plenty of people regard as anti-Semitic, onto the Elizabeth Tower with Big Ben at the top. Is that wrong to do something like that?
It is wrong, but let me get to, it is wrong.
Yeah.
Full stop. It's wrong.
How come it's allowed to happen?
Well, this is the nub of this. Do we want a politician, whether he's the mayor or the deputy chairman of the Conservative Party or anybody else, telling the police who to charge, telling the police which protests that are allowed to go ahead and not allowed to go ahead, or do an operational independence where the commissioner polices without fear or favour, as do police officers? Now listen, I think you can park for a second freedom of speech. You can even park breaking the law. It's insensitive. It's creating fear. It's hurtful. Don't do it. Don't do it. And the same goes for chants. Whether or not you've got freedom of speech to say it, whether or not the context makes it lawful, don't. Because I'm telling you, we've got friends, neighbours and colleagues, all of us, who are scared because they're Jewish, right? So
do you think that slogan is anti-Semitic, by the way?
I think it can be sometimes. I think sometimes it breaks the law, and action has been taken. There's been more than 400 arrests since October the 7th, many of it in relation to anti-Semitism. Sometimes it's breaking the criminal law. Sometimes it could be laws in relation to incitement. But I'm saying don't even go there. You know, right, as somebody who's projecting this, I don't mean you personally, I mean, you know somebody who's projecting this, it's causing hurt. You know that there are Jewish people are scared to come into central London on certain days of the week for no other reason because they are Jewish, their culture, their faith, their religion. And you also know there's been a massive increase in anti-Semitic crimes. Why do it?
I get, obviously, part of your role as a leader is to make that case. It's back to the cultural change argument we were having a few minutes ago on a different topic. But what about your specific role and the conversations you have with the police about how they go about changing or not their approach to political protest? We saw the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary meeting policing leaders yesterday, and this protocol that they published. Broadly speaking, it was about emphasising the existing toolkit that police officers have within the law. Does there need to be a mindset change, given the scale of political protests we're seeing and the tactics, not just in the context of what's happening in the Middle East? There's the questions around Extinction Rebellion and others, around what amounts to legitimate protest. The Prime Minister was even talking about it in the context of what it means to be British. Obviously, protest is about attracting attention, sometimes causing outrage to try and exact change. But does there need to be a step change policing-wise about their approach, their mentality to political protests?
Look, I'm somebody that called Joe Cox a close friend. I knew David Amis as a parliamentary colleague, and it's a matter of public record. I received, police protection. So from personal experience, I know the consequences in relation to the risks that politicians take. But also, I'm somebody who believes passionately about the importance of, open democracy, us being accessible, us being, accessible to our voters. The joy of living in this country rather than North Korea and Russia is we're a democracy, and protest is a cornerstone of democracy. In my view, it should be done lawful, peaceful, and safe. I'm very anxious when the Prime Minister uses phrases like mob rule. Yes, I think it's really important we don't allow parliamentarians to be intimidated, scared, frightened, or their families, or their staff members.
Do you think that happened a week ago?
I think there have been examples. I've spoken to friends of mine who are MPs who are scared to go about the constituency.
So that is mob rule.
I've met parliamentarians whose staff members are scared to come to their office. And so, of course, we need to make sure they are safe. We need to make sure the police do.
But isn't that mob rule? I mean, isn't the Prime Minister onto something? Given what you've just described.
Yeah, but hold on a sec. But at the same time, I think when you've got people who have got legitimate concerns, they should be encouraged to protest in a way that's lawful, peaceful, and safe. So what I would rather the Prime Minister do is explain: listen, temperatures are running high. I know you feel strongly about these issues. Yes, of course you can protest. I encourage you to protest. What you shouldn't be doing is, making threats or making parliamentarians and their families frightened, because that's what you're doing.
Sure, but that's back to the culture of the mindset of the protesters, as opposed to what you're saying in your role as police and crime.
Can I just interrupt? This whole conversation is actually making me feel quite depressed and really anxious, and I'm not even subjected to any of this. Are we actually approaching a bit of a crisis?
Well, I think one of the issues living in a democracy is there are these tensions, and these are good tensions to have. These are good discussions to have.
This
right?
seems beyond the usual tensions. This is like getting scary.
Adam, I remember the days preceding Joe Cox's murder. I would not want to relive those. And Brendan is living them every day, her partner and her kids. Stephen Timms is a dear friend of mine. He luckily survived being stabbed. And David Amis, of course, was killed. And so, and I've spoken to the new mayor of Gdansk. The former mayor was assassinated. The former prime minister of Japan was assassinated. And I could go on in relation to what happens across the world in relation to the risk that politicians live under. But it's really important we give the police the resources. So I welcome the part of the Prime Minister's announcement this week where there's additional resources to the police. Really important. But what I want leaders to do, responsible leaders to do, is to bring communities together. Look, if you're a young person growing up who's angry about issue A, B or C, I've got to give you a channel to channel that anger, right? That's the joy of a democracy.
Sure.
Join a political party, lobby your MP, go to a march, sign a petition, stand for office, right? That's the sort of language we want our leaders to use, rather than using words like mob rule that makes you feel like the other, when actually somebody should be explaining the consequences of you going outside an MP's home, or the leader of their party's home, or the mayor's home.
Right, I'm told you've got a bus to catch and a city to run. But before you go, very quickly, yesterday, Chris didn't know anything about the Willy Wonka experience in Glasgow, the really quite shoddy tourist attraction that everyone complained about. London has lots of live events. What if that had happened in London? What would you have done?
It would never happen in London. Listen, it was possible when ABBA Voyager began with those avatars. It could have been a damn squib,
flop, yeah.
But it wasn't. But can I just say, you go to any event in London, you will not have the Willy Wonka experience that was had in
guarantee
Glasgow.
it will never happen here.
I can't guarantee a cheerful Oompa Loompa or Timothy Chalamet. What I can guarantee is value for money.
Well, thanks for coming in and good to catch up.
Always a pleasure.
Now, Chris, a conversation with Sadiq Khan is always interesting because running a big global city in 2024 is an interesting job. But that was particularly interesting. And I just wanted to explain why I sort of asked about, is it a crisis, and why I was saying I was feeling quite anxious. And it's because I've had now 2 days of hearing political leaders and politicians effectively saying that they're worried for their own lives because of what's happening in politics. And to me, that seems like a much more kind of vivid warning sign than what we were discussing last week, which was, did the speaker tweak parliamentary procedure because this group or that group was being a bit threatening?
Yeah, and then that bigger picture point about what it means to be British and some of these fundamentals. So a big question about values, then things like an acceptance that the right to protest is sacrosanct and that the police have operational independence. But then if you accept those two pillars, which most do, everything else is contested. And then what's acceptable, and cultural change and the actions of the police in a noisy, confusing environment. My goodness, it's just a big, big topic.
And talking of other topics, you're about to get on a train. I see you've got some reading material for the journey to go to Rochdale.
Yeah, so a splash of deja vu, another parliamentary by-election, and one that when in the early hours of Friday morning we get the result of, we'll be able to look at through the prism of actually quite a lot of the rows we've just been talking about, particularly in the context of the Middle East. Substantial Muslim population in that corner of Greater Manchester, what's happening in Gaza, a big element of the election campaign there, George Galloway amongst others in the running. So Friday's news will be shaped by quite a lot of the themes that we've just been talking about.
And if you enjoyed watching this, we've got a treat for you. Chris and I will be reassembling on the iPlayer at 7 a.m. on Friday morning to bring you a live episode of Newscast, digesting what has actually happened overnight in Rochdale. Although overnight was just the counting. It was actually during the day. But you see what I mean. Anyway, tune in, BBC iPlayer at 7 o'clock, and we'll see you then. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Newscast from the BBC.